Hello, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and today's guest joins me from across the world. Pretty incredible, really. Chris Perry joins me. He is a performance coach in the sport of rowing. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and everybody watching. If you wouldn't mind, just start off by explaining a little bit about your sports history and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks very much, Tim. It's a great pleasure to join you on this podcast, albeit far, far away. So my background really is that I began rowing at school, and I then went on to Loughborough University, where I studied sports science. And at the same time, I began rowing with the British team based at the National Water Sports Centre in Nottingham. Unfortunately, before the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, I was trying for the team, and unfortunately, I had an injury and was not able to continue. And I was invited to start coaching with the lightweight British squad members who were training at Nottingham at the time. So I started working with them. And then in 1986, I had a short invitation to go to Hong Kong just for a short contract to help them prepare for the Asian Games in 1986. And after the Asian Games in 86, they made me an offer to stay and help develop the program there pretty much from scratch. And I ended up staying there nearly 36 years. I retired from the program there in December. So I was with the program almost 36 years, and I took the Hong Kong team to 8 Olympic Games and 9 Asian Games.
Wow.
During the same period around 2012, I was invited by World Rowing to also become involved in their World Development Program with a focus on the Asian region. So I began also helping with coach education and rowing development in the Asian region. And since retiring, I've taken up more of a role in that area. So going forward, I will be involved with the Asian Rowing Development Program. But that's a sort of, in a nutshell, background.
Well, as somebody that studied at Chichester, I'll have to forgive you for going to Loughborough. When we talk about starting a program from scratch, albeit yes, it was a while ago, it still requires incredible effort and incredible commitment, I think, because oftentimes you don't have the funding, oftentimes you don't have the pool of athletes to start with, and here you are starting something from nothing. How do you recruit athletes to a program that is only just starting to exist?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, when I came out, everything was really new. The majority of rowing, there was local rowing, but the majority were expat rowers who'd rowed in other parts of the world. And so there was only a very small nucleus of local athletes, certainly not enough to be able to build a competitive program. And so, yeah, one of the first jobs was really to find athletes, and I really worked to reach out to other sports, and that was part of my first approach. So I did two things. One was literally to go up to people in the street on the train who looked like they were a bit sporty. If their head came up to the handrail, then I asked them if they were interested or if they lived in. I literally gave out name cards, but also I did approach athletes in other sports to see if, especially as they were retiring from swimming or, changing from other sports, to see whether we could get some talent transfer. And I was quite successful in that. I managed to get about 8 or 9 athletes who came from various sports, quite a few from swimming and from canoe kayak. And those athletes became kind of the core or the nucleus of the first group of rowers that I worked with.
It's interesting that, anthropometrics were a determination of whether somebody was in your program. Is this something where you have specific requirements in order to be a successful rower? You have to be of certain build, certain height, certain weight? Or is it, it doesn't really matter as long as we have the intangibles, the motivation, the drive, the hard work, etc. Where's that balance?
I think, rowing is a sport that requires basically people who are tall with long levers, and they need to have been, gifted with a good engine. So, aerobic capacity is really important. the thing that was fortunate for us was that, rowing had two categories, including the lightweight category. The lightweight category is for athletes, for men up to an average of 70 kilos, nobody heavier than 72 and a half, and for women 57, nobody heavier than 59. And so we were able to, that fitted very well with the general anthropometric measurements of the Hong Kong population as a whole. And so we were able to, I focused very much on lightweight recruitment, but even for lightweights, you're still looking for people with long levers, and you're looking for people with good aerobic physiology. So we later, after the early recruitment, we started going round schools, taking rowing machines as a kind of turnkey to get into the schools. And then we took that opportunity when we were able to get into a school also to measure height, arm span, and one or two other anthropometric characteristics as a starting point. And then we would bring down people who we considered to have potential for kind of free of charge learn to row courses. And we would do very simple things like the beep test shuttle runs or those kind of things to make some early assessment of their aerobic potential.
Sports in most respects are about winning, about being successful. And here you are starting a program in a new country, in an environment where this sport really doesn't have popularity. So it's hard to recruit. And then you're going to places such as the Olympics and competing against powerhouses in the Olympics. Obviously Great Britain being one of those. We could name some others. How do you put that in perspective, knowing that you're representing a smaller nation with less of a talent pool, with less of a pedigree, and then you're competing against these organizations, these programs that have something that you may not have? How do you, as a coach, deal with that "it's not fair" attitude?
Yeah, I mean, had to be a big mind shift for me, first of all, as a coach, because I'd been working really with high performance athletes, gold medalists in lightweight from GB. So, changing into that development environment definitely required a mindset change from me, and an understanding as a young coach, only 24 at that time, understanding that, you can't suddenly implant a high performance program into a development program. So what I tried to do was really not to think about that for a while, but I tried to expose the people who were rowing to athletes who had reached that level or from around the world. So what I did is I did two things. I took people out frequently on training camps, especially to Italy. We used to go to their high performance training center, had a very good connection with the top coach there. And so we used to go and train with the Italians, live with the Italians, row at the Italian training center. And at the same time, in the winter, the weather in Hong Kong is quite good for training in the winter months. We used to bring people out from Europe who had wanting to avoid the cold of the winter, and they would come and train, and we'd offer them a training base, and we'd basically look after them. And so we had athletes always around from different countries who were at a much higher level, and who basically gradually started to change the sort of local mindset towards training.
One of the challenges of I say this respectfully, but a smaller Olympic sport is recruitment of athletes, and then getting the attention. And sometimes smaller sports rely on a few superstar athletes to carry the name of the sport, so that it is more than just a quadrennial cycle of, oh, there's rowing, let's watch some rowing. How do you develop the base of athletes so that you continually get some of those those exceptional athletes? Because I know a lot of the smaller sports struggle with that, of, the sport is dying because we don't have these elite level athletes. Is it a case of we've got to build the juniors and the base in order to get one or two, or are we going to spot check to look for the exceptional ones amongst just a few?
Yeah, I mean, I think rowing is a sport where people row for long periods of time, even at the very high level. in Tokyo Olympics, the average age of the finalists was around 28 years old for both men and women. So it's a sport, it's not a sport really where people have to be young. And quite a lot of research in rowing shows that actually the ones who are super successful as juniors don't always make it to that 28-year-old level. They burn out.
Why?
I think it's a lot to do with junior burnout. And I think that there's often in programs still, for funding or other reasons, pressure for juniors to be really successful as well. And maybe, coaches have this incentive to press juniors too hard. By the time they come out of their junior years, they already feel like they've been a lifetime in the sport, and they feel like they've already reached the kind of level of success that they were aiming for. So they don't carry on and they don't move on. And then sometimes some late starters who come in at the under 23 level are the ones who actually in rowing go on to be very successful. There are successful juniors, of course, there are always exceptions, but this is generally the case. So we did focus quite a lot on talent identification. Rowing is a sport that lends itself to that very well. Again, going back to the tall, good engine person, it's a closed skill, so that we can teach people relatively quickly. And there are very good examples of people in 4 years or 5 years from beginner to a world championship medal. So yeah, we focused a lot on talent identification and that as being a way to try to find some athletes who would get us results relatively quickly. And it worked quite well. We had a number of athletes who, having not won any medals, came in and started to win medals fairly quickly, and that really set us on the road to funding and to everything else.
You've moved on from coaching, and you're now more into the coach development realm. What do you see in coaches, areas that maybe are lacking that need to be filled? I saw a discussion on social media today about the misconceptions of coaching. And I was curious what you think are maybe some misconceptions and areas that coaches need further development.
I think one of the really things that struck me, really strongly in recent years is that, and especially I think advice for young coaches is that, they often go into this, especially if they're going into a performance related program, they go in with this mindset that, it's all about performance, and, everything they do is built around just trying to create, performance and to push the athletes towards performance. And what I've learned over the years is it's much more about the people and about how you deal with individual athletes or groups of athletes as people, and also the pathway that those athletes have. So how you deal with younger athletes in the program who may need a lot of guidance, where in comparison with the older or more experienced athletes in the program where you need more buy-in. So, with the youngsters, we may just tell them, this is what we need to do. But for the older ones, we need to sit down with them and agree with them what we need to do. And they need to have a role in the program in terms of how they contribute to the design of the training program or to those things. So I think, I've gone much more in the direction of the sort of transformational coaching thing, about thinking about how you deal with athletes as people. And I think that, young coaches do sometimes make that mistake. And I think the other thing that I would draw on is that organization and structure in a program is a lot more important than what people sometimes realize. And what I learned when I went to Italy was not so much, I learned about techniques and training methods and so on, and I could learn from their training programs. But to be honest, again, that becomes often a focus of young coaches, that they want to find out who's doing what their training program is and so on. But actually, very often it's the logistics, it's the structure, it's the organization of day-to-day, month-to-month training, and also, just how you put all the resources in place, the support staff, the equipment, how do you move it to events. And sometimes having a very structured or well-structured program can really help.
You're fairly unique in today's world of coaching, in that you've been in one kind of locale for many years, and we see coaches almost job hopping these days. So I'm curious, having been in one location, what have you seen change in coaching and athletes over the decades that you've been there and you've been coaching? How has you as a coach, how has it had to change to adapt to the athlete that you now work with?
I think, yeah, I mean, there are obviously a lot of things, but I think, the most, I guess, the most sort of obvious are the communication mediums and the way that young athletes today work and operate just in their normal day-to-day living environment. And I think that is something that's really changed a lot. You've got now, if you like, the sort of TikTok generation. Information is shared in short bursts through all sorts of different channels. And when you communicate with young athletes, and I've grown older and my teams have got younger, so then as a 60-year-old coach working with young 19, 20, 22-year-old athletes, I think one really has to learn what kind of channels they're on and how to communicate with them. I think that's obviously a big change. I think, of course, certainly in Asia, the attitude to sport and so on has changed a lot. In the past, I think sport has been something that you just literally only do for recreation and fun. And now it's become a much more professional operation. People have many, many more full-time athletes. When I started, there were no full-time athletes. Now, like, our whole program was full-time athletes who are living, eating, training in the same training center. So that sort of professionalism has changed. And then I think the science has changed. And I think I'm a really big believer in the science of sport. And I think that what I do in technique or in training methods, I like it to be backed up by some scientific evidence and evidence-based coaching. So I'm a strong believer in using sports science, and so I think that's also really come a long way. And in the most recent, firstly with physiology, but more recently with things like biomechanics, which are newer, certainly in our sports. Yeah, so those are the main areas I've seen a lot of change.
Yeah. And now looking back over your career in coaching, thinking in terms of coaches who are now coming into the profession, and we're seeing the coaching profession, at least in the United States, grow quite rapidly. What advice would you have for somebody coming into the profession, or maybe looking to improve as a coach?
I think my advice, firstly, is going back to what I said before, is that remember that you have to deal with people, and that very often the best results are achieved by creating an environment where you really can get everybody on the same page and everybody working together. Remember to deal with yes, different age groups and different athletes in different ways. Don't try and find a one size fits all. Don't obsess over what other people's training programs are. Go to the science, go to the research, and of course, by all means, we all share training program ideas all the time. But I think that I can give you the recipe, but you can't bake the same cake is a really good saying. And I think that you have to work out how to bake your own cakes. So I think that would also be advice. And then I think, as someone who's just retired, I had a lot of very nice messages, obviously, when I retired, from generations of athletes who I've worked with. And what I found was really interesting is that almost none of those messages, and we've had some good results, almost none of them mentioned, oh, do you remember when we won that gold medal? What they remembered and what they said in their very nice messages to me was, I remember when you took care of me in that day when I had the problem with my dad died, or I remember when you took care of me when I had that terrible injury that lasted nearly a whole year. That's what the athlete remembers. Of course, they credit a little bit the coach with winning a gold medal here or there, but in the end, the athlete wins the medal, not the coach, and we shouldn't forget that. And I think that the main thing they remember, as you do with a really good teacher or lecturer or anybody in your life who has influence, is that they remember you for how you interacted with them as people. And I think that would be, the real takeaway, is really to remember that.
Some great wisdom. I took some notes, Chris. I'm not going to lie. But thank you so much for that. I know that you have a wealth of wisdom, and I try to keep these short for both our guests and for the audience. But if somebody does have a question for you and wants to follow up later, what's the best way for them to reach you?
I think reach out to me through LinkedIn is a good way. I'm really happy to catch up with people and to talk more on these sort of topics. It's an area that fascinates me. I'm always happy to share, any experience that I might have. I'm involved particularly in some mentoring for female coaches, particularly in Asia, where we have a real problem with developing female coaches. And so that's a particular interest area. But for any coach, yeah, I'm always happy to reach out and just to have a chat. It's fascinating. I'm still learning at my level, and I learn a lot from everybody I talk to.
And I certainly learn a lot from these, and I can't thank you enough for joining me. Just a reminder, if you are watching on the podcast, look for Chris Perry on LinkedIn. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, like, or follow wherever you're watching. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and Chris Perry, thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.